What if the Middle East was never carved up in secret rooms by distant empires? What if the lines that still bleed across maps today were never drawn because the Sykes-Picot Agreement simply never happened? From a historian's lens, Sykes-Picot was not just a treaty, it was a psychological fracture. It replaced organic political evolution with artificial borders, turning provinces into states and communities into minorities overnight. In this alternate reality, the absence of Sykes-Picot does not produce instant harmony, but it allows the Middle East to evolve according to power, culture, and negotiation, rather than imperial convenience. As the Ottoman Empire collapses after World War I, no Anglo-French blueprint exists to divide its Arab provinces. Instead of mandates imposed from Paris and London, the region enters a turbulent but organic reordering. Local elites, tribal leaders, urban notables, clerics, and former Ottoman administrators compete to fill the vacuum. Rather than dozens of fragile nation-states, a few large political blocs emerge. In the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan never crystallize as separate entities. Instead, a greater Syrian federation forms, centered on Damascus. Lebanon exists as an autonomous coastal and commercial zone, protected for its mercantile and plural character, but not isolated as a sectarian state. Without French manipulation of confessional politics, sectarian identity remains important, but not constitutionalized. Conflict exists, but it is negotiated within a shared political framework rather than frozen into borders. To the south, control of the holy cities becomes the central question. Without British sponsorship, the House of Saud faces stronger resistance. Mecca and Medina ultimately come under a pan-Islamic custodianship, administered by a council of Arab and Muslim authorities rather than a single dynasty. The legitimacy of guardianship rests not on conquest, but consensus. This limits absolutism and prevents the rapid emergence of a rigid religious state centered solely on one interpretation of Islam. Mesopotamia follows a different path. Iraq does not emerge as a stitched-together state of incompatible regions. Instead, Baghdad becomes the capital of a Mesopotamian polity dominated by Sunni and Shia elites who are forced to compromise early because no external power enforces hierarchy. Kurdish regions gain negotiated autonomy rather than rebellion. The state is unstable but not perpetually broken. Then oil is discovered and everything changes. Without colonial borders, oil does not automatically belong to countries, but to regions and federations. Revenue sharing becomes a political necessity rather than a post-colonial afterthought. No single ruler controls vast reserves unchecked. Oil wealth strengthens institutions instead of replacing them. Foreign companies still arrive, but they negotiate with blocs, not client states. This radically alters global power dynamics. The Middle East does not become a chessboard of proxy regimes. It becomes a negotiating actor. Europe lacks mandate control. The United States enters the region later and more cautiously, unable to dominate fragmented states one by one. There are drawbacks. Without external enforcement, conflicts are bloodier early on. Borders are fluid. Power struggles are intense. But they are resolved internally, not internationalized. Over time, larger political units stabilize because fragmentation is costly. There is no Israel-Arab conflict in its modern form because the regional framework into which Zionism enters is larger, negotiated, and less brittle. There is tension, resistance, compromise, but not perpetual siege. By the mid-20th century, the Middle East is not one unified state, but it is not a patchwork of weak ones either. It resembles Europe before nationalism hardened, competitive, proud, often volatile, but internally sovereign. History would remember this Middle East not as peaceful, but as self-determined, shaped by its own failures rather than imposed ones. And the final question remains. If the Middle East had been allowed to draw its own map, would it have avoided a century of intervention or merely faced its conflicts sooner on its own terms? Put your thoughts in comments.
Like, comment, share and subscribe.